I am specifically drawn to Krishnamacharya Yoga because of the emphasis on personal development in multiple areas or facets of the individual. So, whereas some of the styles I had come across before of yoga very much emphasize physical development and purification of the person, very little attention was given to spiritual development, intellectual development, emotional development, and really more specifically interpersonal development, so how the relationships improve or change. For me, that was personally an enormous draw, and once I started in the tradition, I realized that what enabled all of these areas to be developed in every person was that the system is based on treating each person as an individual. That gives it a lot of power, and for me it's become one of the reasons why I stayed with this tradition, because it makes me a much better teacher. I'm able to meet my students at their level, with their needs, with their challenges, with their strengths, and work with that to bring them to the place where they would like to be. Before beginning this teacher training, I had already had two different trainings, in both of them in the United States. And I value very much what they offered me, but I felt that there was just much deeper to go. So they were different systems as well. I was specifically Ashtanga Vinyasa then, and there was a lot of emphasis on the physical body, on the physical development of the person, on the development of discipline. But I felt that this training was going to take me to a completely different level, and to offer me additional tools that the systems that I had been exposed to before did not. So even something as simple as pranayama, which we do get a little bit of exposure to in the United States, is typically seen as something that supports your asana practice or your postural practice, as opposed to a practice of its own, let alone a more powerful and more subtle practice. And here it is very much respected, and it is also used intelligently to support the person. So for me, there was still a lot to learn, even after having been through two trainings already. And I felt the only place to get it was here. Part of what we learn in our training is to let go, to surrender to the things that come, whether they are emotional or spiritual or physical. And so being in a place that can sometimes be challenging, that is not a place that you're accustomed to as a foreigner, extends your experience from within the training outside. So even the walk to the school and the walk back home gives you ample opportunity to practice patience and awareness of the world around you and also of yourself. So I think it supports a lot of what we do here in ways that studying in the United States, for me at least, would not. I think the third important thing is getting out of your typical routine. So in the United States, I would have easy access to internet and phone, both my job and my family would be easily accessible. And so every day when I would go home, there would be the temptation to be distracted and to be brought out of that space that training creates. And in India, it's just not an option. There are days when internet works, there are days when it does not work. And you get to extend what you learn and the energy that you create in class throughout the rest of your day. There is a lot that I've learned in this training, even just within the first 2 modules that we've had already, that either were completely new or which give a completely new perspective to things that I thought I already knew. There is a deep respect in this tradition for sacred texts, which are really the source of a lot of our techniques, whether they be in asana or pranayama or meditation. And going back to those sacred texts and the emphasis that they get in this training is something that I had not come across before. And delving deeper into that reveals a character to the practices that we do and the reason why we do them, or even why they're called what they're called, that is very special. There is also a lot of emphasis in areas that we just do not see in the United States very often. For me personally, one of the most powerful elements of this training has been chant, and not just learning the Sanskrit, but feeling the chant in the process of chanting and seeing the effect that it has afterwards. If there's one thing that I can call out that is especially different, it's a newfound appreciation for how very subtle things, whether it is a particular chant that we do, whether it's a particular visualization that we use during or separate from asana practice, and the incredible and sometimes immediate effect that it can have in you. Something that's really special about the training here is that you're doing this with a number of people, and oftentimes people who come from very different backgrounds, both within yoga and just in life in general. And because this tradition is really founded on the idea that you treat everyone as an individual, I think it adds enormously to the experience that you are actually exposed to people who are very much individuals, whose own ideas may challenge you sometimes, whose own perspectives in the world may be quite different from your own. We have half of the group is Indian, which is absolutely lovely, because through them I get some exposure to the ideas that we talk about in class in theory, but which many of them have been exposed to since early childhood. There are a number of international students as well who come from various countries and whose own ideas about yoga, about lifestyle vary significantly. And throughout the trainings, we've been able to use different individuals as examples of people for whom a particular pranayama or asana might be appropriate, who might benefit significantly from it. We can see how different asanas are expressed in different individuals. We can see the challenges and the strengths that each has, and sometimes how those challenges and strengths are related to one another. And everyone is in their own journey, which is really what all of this is about. So you also get to see how each individual responds, is challenged by, or is nourished by some of the things that we're learning, and how they evolve and how they transform, which is really fantastic, because it's something that you can take away as an understanding of how you can work with people who are quite different from you. there's this idea in a lot of other yoga traditions where there's one particular way of doing things and it should be applied the same way to everyone. So you essentially fit the person to the yoga. And this particular tradition is completely the opposite, right? It uses the many tools in yoga to accommodate the person's needs and the person's potentials. And so being exposed to very different people who are on sometimes very different paths that are leading towards the same place, who come from very different backgrounds, is really useful as a teacher to understand the students that you may have in the future or have now. I love all of the teachers that we have in this training, and we have a few of them. First and foremost, they are wonderfully trained, and each of them brings their own personality and personal experience in their own learnings. One of the things that is really valuable for me is within the training, we do have a number of teachers who were direct students of TKV Desikachar, and you can see some of that quality coming through them. We really owe this tradition to Sri Krishnamacharya and his son TKV Desikachar, and so it's really beautiful to see how the tradition that these two men really helped evolve continues through the people that they have taught directly. So one of the things that is really wonderful about this training is that unlike many of the trainings that I have come across and the teacher trainings that I've done in the United States, this was really a group effort. It involved a team of teachers as opposed to simply one person. So it was really lovely to get multiple perspectives from different people who are different ages, different genders, even come from different countries, and who have their own perspectives and understanding of this very rich tradition. To say a little bit about some of the teachers that we have, I have absolutely loved working with Evelyn, who does our asana classes in the morning. She works in collaboration with the teacher that teaches the asana techniques, and she uses that opportunity in the morning to help us experience the asanas that we're learning in theory. One of the absolutely beautiful things about Evelyn is that you can see how other teachers might easily fall into the trap of just using the class to teach you an asana and leave it at that. But Evelyn finds a way to make these classes so deeply personal, and I've encountered incredible experiences and spiritual experiences in some of her classes. Dr. Seshadri has the very difficult job of giving us an introduction to Ayurveda, which is a topic that is at least as rich as yoga itself, which has a shared perspective, but really also its own perspective in some areas, and which is incredibly complicated. One of the wonderful things is that he constantly draws connection between the tradition in yoga that we're studying and the perspectives in Ayurveda, primarily the fact that every person is treated as an individual. And he manages to take very complex ideas and distill them in a way that is understandable to the layman. One of the other things that I really appreciate about him is in other circumstances where I have tried to learn Ayurveda either from a teacher or from a book, it feels highly westernized. So it's constantly being presented through the filter of the Western perspective, either on individuals or on medicine itself. And instead of taking that route, Dr. Seshadri goes back to the sacred texts. So even though it's very, very challenging when he starts to quote Sanskrit from some of these texts, there is an immense value because he's taking you back to the source of all of these teachings. And he takes the time to explain each of these elements and answer any questions that you have about it. So he's someone who I very much appreciate. Sriram is someone who also had a very tough job in teaching us Sanskrit, and specifically introducing us to Devanagari script. And he's someone who has immense patience, but is also very demanding of his students to make sure that we learn the right way, and we learn to pronounce correctly and learn to identify correctly. He has a wonderful way with students. Many of us come from different countries where we have never encountered some of the sounds in Sanskrit, and he really takes his time to help us understand how to manipulate our mouths and sometimes even our tongues to try to get the language out. I really can't say enough wonderful things about Menaka Desikachar, TKV Desikachar's wife, who teaches us both Sutra chanting and Vedic chanting, and then also yoga philosophy. She is an immensely patient person, and she takes her time teaching us exactly how to pronounce things correctly. One of the things that I very much appreciate about Menaka Madam is that she has students in class with varied levels of experience in Sanskrit and in chant. Some folks actually are very familiar with Sanskrit but not familiar with chanting at all, and some are very familiar with chanting but not very familiar with Sanskrit. So she really treats each student as an individual. She is very, very patient with those who are learning for the first time, and she's a lot more forgiving with them. For those of us who have a little bit more experience, and I myself had been training in chant for a little bit of time, she's a lot more exacting. She wants us to be the best that we can be in this, especially since we're going to be teachers, and at some point we will be teaching chanting in some capacity. So with me, she can just hear the slightest mistake and will often stop me and ask me if I know what I've done wrong. So I've learned to be very aware of how I say things, of how it is that I read things, and that's something that is quite different, and I very much appreciate, because it has made me so much better at chanting. It is really wonderful to work with Kausthub Desikachar. He has taught us history of yoga, theory of prana and pranayama, and then course planning, so the development of some of the courses that we're going to teach individuals, whether that's how it is that we will teach certain asanas, or even how we are going to put together asanas into a class, and then how we put classes together over time to help someone achieve a particular asana that will be therapeutic or helpful for the individual. Kausthub also is my personal mentor in this training, so every student has a mentor. Some are working with mentors that they have had in this tradition for a very long time. Others receive a mentor once we start working in the training. For me, it has been really wonderful working with Kausthub in both capacities. There are few people who can deliver a lecture in a way that is consistently engaging and that is always pulling morsels and subtleties and topics that I feel that I already knew, but which suddenly I have a new perspective on. He has helped me become a better yoga teacher in general in this way, but also just watching him teach. I've taken a lot of his techniques, his demeanor, his ideas, and brought them into teaching in other areas. So I teach photography at the university as well, and a lot of the way that Kausthub approaches teaching, I've adapted to teaching photography. In terms of personal development, there really isn't enough that I can say about working with Kausthub. One of the things I really appreciate about Kausthub is that he's met me where I'm at. I have been practicing yoga in one capacity or another for 16 years. I did come to this tradition from a very different tradition, and he appreciated the discipline that I had learned from the tradition, and used what I had learned to help me develop even further. And he's also shown me where some of the things that I had learned and was using in my practice were not so useful. Working with him is challenging in fantastic ways, because many of the practices that he's given me have revealed things about myself that I wasn't really happy about, but which needed to be revealed, and which were not going to change until I began to see them. I have watched my life transform, my practice transform, since working with him in ways that are both personal and sometimes very obvious to everyone else. And something that I appreciate very much is that sometimes the practices that he gives me seem so incredibly simple on the surface that you can't imagine that they're going to have any kind of effect. And yet, when I actually practice them, they have such profound effects, even compared to much more difficult physical practices that I have done in the past. So there's a real appreciation for how I, as an individual, or any of the students, I suspect, apply and use their energy. That we are using it intelligently to achieve the things that we want to achieve. He has really been a fantastic influence for me, both as a teacher, and has taught me how to be a better student. And it's really a relationship that means a lot to me. For me, this training has been so important in understanding how yoga touches every level of our being. And it's something that, for me personally, it was there for me when I was much younger. I was born outside of the United States in the Caribbean, within a community that had a very strong sense of relationship to others, to family, and then also to the world around you, where spirituality was part of everyday life, where even something like Catholic faith was integrated into the other understandings of the workings of the world, where the importance of ritual was present in daily life. And I had never come across this kind of an emphasis in other yoga trainings, or even in my own personal development and practice, but it was always something that I felt. Whenever I would practice, there was a sense of poetry. Whenever I would run into something that was very, very challenging, very difficult for me, that even irritated me sometimes, and especially so when I ran into something that felt like a gift that it was suddenly granted to me. So it was really meaningful to integrate that. So it was very meaningful for me to be in this training and to delve so much more deeply into spirituality, into energetics, which I already felt were in me somehow, but now I had tools to be able to touch them, to work with them, and also to begin to understand how they affect my daily life. For me, it has been very personal, because at the same time that I'm learning a system that was founded and developed in India, a country that I didn't have any connection to in my own cultural background, I have at the same time reconnected to elements from my background in Cuba, which had, over the years living in the United States, been lost. So it has really been deeply personal for me to be able to reconnect with these aspects of me. And it's enabled also for me to speak with the older members of my family who still remember all of this, who had grown up with it, and who were in the process of passing it on to their own children when we were uprooted and moved to the United States, and who really deeply appreciate that suddenly they have a connection with someone in the younger generation in the family that takes them back to all of this. I absolutely would recommend this training to anyone who is very serious about yoga, whether it is about their personal practice, and they're not interested in being teachers, but are very much interested in personal development, but especially if they're interested in being teachers. I think for anyone who is serious about yoga and who is serious about the transformation that yoga can enable, whether you plan to ever teach a single other person in your life, the learnings that you take away from this training, it's just something that you can't find easily anywhere else, and which you certainly cannot decipher on your own easily. For anyone who wants to be a teacher, I think it's absolutely critical to learn to appreciate and address every student as an individual. And this is just something that is not seen in most other traditions, whether in the US or even in some traditions in India. And I think there is an immense disservice to many people who don't fit the particular model of those traditions, but who are asked consistently to meet it or to fit it. So even if it's to simply change the paradigm in which a yoga teacher works, to learn to see yoga as a set of tools that they can use to help someone transform, and that in fact the yogic process is not in the tools themselves, but is in the act of the transformation and the goal of the transformation. I think that's just irreplaceable. It'll make you a fantastic teacher if you know this, and I think you can know every technique there is to know, and you would be a lesser teacher if you did not.